spending cuts in order to get his economic plan through the Senate. The president made his comments in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a city that has voted for the Democratic presidential candidate for more than 30 years, including last year's election. Today, Mr. Clinton made a campaign-style visit to Milwaukee's South Side. With Congress in recess, he appealed to the voters to lobby their senators to vote for his economic plan. Then, in a noontime speech at the convention center, Mr. Clinton said he was elected to fight what he called brain-dead politics in Washington. He said he wanted to move both parties away from their entrenched positions.
Some, but not all, in the National Democratic Party have placed too much faith in the whole politics of entitlement, the idea that big bureaucracies and government spending demanding nothing in return can produce the results we want. On the other hand, some, but not all, in the National Republican Party have practiced the politics of abandonment, of walking away from common concerns, and in simply insisting that as long as you don't raise taxes on upper-income people and don't talk about it when you raise taxes on anybody else, everything's going to be fine. I ran for president basically on the same things that I found had worked for me when I was a governor. Not entitlement, not abandonment, but empowerment. The idea of creating a new American community by offering people more opportunity and demanding more responsibility.
U.S. consumers increased their spending in April despite no growth in their incomes. The Commerce Department reported personal spending rose 1%, the strongest gain since October. Personal incomes, meanwhile, were flat, breaking a string of 4 straight monthly gains. The department also reported construction spending was down in April by 0.4%. Robin?
At least 15 people were killed and dozens injured in Sarajevo today when Serb mortar shells struck spectators during a soccer game. The attack came on a Muslim holy day. It was one of the worst attacks on civilians in Sarajevo since the war began. The president of Guatemala was forced out of office today. The army ousted Jorge Serrano 1 week after he dissolved Congress and suspended the Constitution. Serrano said unrest over economic conditions in that Central American nation led to the crackdown. There were no reports of violence in the capital after today's ouster. The nation's Congress is expected to meet tomorrow to elect a provisional leader.
U.S. Senator John Kerry of Massachusetts, visiting Hanoi today, reported progress on the POW MIA issue. Kerry was part of a delegation that ended 2 days of meetings with Vietnamese leaders. He said they were making very special efforts to establish the fate of about 2,200 Americans listed as missing from the Vietnam War. Kerry did not say whether he would recommend lifting the economic embargo which the U.S. imposed on Vietnam almost 30 years ago. Cambodia's ruling party today demanded new elections in some parts of the country. A government spokesman claimed there were balloting irregularities in at least 4 of Cambodia's 21 provinces. The United Nations, which organized last week's general election, has pronounced it fair and free. A UN spokesman said there was no reason for new polling.
There were more riots in Germany last night over the weekend killing of 5 Turks. We have a report narrated by Richard Vaughn of Worldwide Television News.
By late evening, the mood in Solingen had deteriorated rapidly. It was the second night in a row that anger over the killings of 5 Turks spilled out onto the streets. Many protesters swore that they would revenge the firebomb attack in which 3 children died. The demonstrators repeated their previous night's blockade of the main motorway linking Hamburg and Berlin, causing a 13-mile-long traffic jam. By midnight, Solingen was in chaos. Riot police withstood barrage after barrage of missiles and abuse from the protesters. Increasingly, they'd become the focus of anger. The Turks feel that neither the police nor the government are doing enough to stamp out racist attacks. Police have charged 1 teenager with the murders, but it's been revealed that he lied about his accomplices. The false evidence has wasted valuable police time in the hunt for the other attackers. The Turkish community continues to demand justice amidst calls from the government for calm.
The investigation into a deadly and mysterious illness widened today with a report of 3 possible new cases: Utah, Kansas, and North Carolina. 11 people have died from the unexplained respiratory disease, all of them in or near a Navajo Indian reservation in New Mexico. Health officials believe it may be caused by a virus. They said the symptoms in the new cases are similar but could easily be due to another cause. That's our summary of the day's news. Now it's on to a newsmaker interview with the Secretary of State, a Tom Bearden report on seeking asylum, and the dollars and cents of art museums.
First tonight, the emerging Clinton foreign policy. There was an uproar last week in Washington when the third-ranking official in the State Department, Peter Tarnoff, told reporters that in the new world situation, the United States would not be exercising world leadership as it had traditionally, with deference to European wishes in Bosnia as an example. Secretary of State Warren Christopher reacted strongly, declaring that American leadership was undiminished. We asked the Secretary to expand on these themes in an interview this afternoon at the State Department. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
After 4 months in this job, and especially in view of all the flurries of last week, would you say that the Clinton administration has established its own distinctive foreign policy?
Yes, I think we are on the verge of doing so if we haven't done it, Robin. We came into office and we had a series of crises to deal with. I think the most challenging set of crises that any president has had for a long time. Let me just illustrate a few of those. For example, when we came into office, Israel was on the verge of being sanctioned because of the deportation issue. Yeltsin was clearly in a good deal of difficulty in Russia. We had the problem in Haiti, which had only been dealt with as an immigration problem up to that time. Certainly we had the looming problem coming up with China. Iraq was very much a serious problem at the time we came in, so we had a series of things we had to deal with. I think we've stabilized those problems. We haven't solved them all by any means, but we certainly have stabilized them. And now we're in the process of turning the corner and being able to establish our own agenda, things that the president came into office determined to do, as have a global agenda, be concerned about non-proliferation, about population problems, about environmental problems, as well as dealing with some of the preventive diplomacy that is possible in this world. I would say the Middle East peace process is one of the best examples. So I think that we have dealt with the problems that we inherited, some of them very difficult, mean problems, not dealt with all of them by any means, but I think we've stabilized most of them, and we've begun to establish our own agenda.
Would you consider Bosnia dealt with?
No, sir. I would consider that a situation where we've analyzed America's interests carefully, and we've worked out a program, I think, that takes into account America's interests. Bosnia is a tragic situation. It's a quagmire of competing interests with historic, ancient hatreds. In that situation, we do have a humanitarian interest, but we have a strong interest, strategic interest, in preventing that from spreading. We've tried to design a policy that takes into account American interests. That's our job. That's my job now. Certainly that problem continues to be one that worries us every day, but I think it needs to be put in the context of the problems that we have dealt with successfully and are dealing with successfully.
When you say you feel on the verge of expressing your own foreign policy, is that going to amount to something like a Clinton doctrine? Can you... Well, let me ask you that first.
Well, I think there are some very important elements of the Clinton doctrine. Perhaps the most important that comes to my mind immediately is that the United States must lead. We must lead in every respect. When we're protecting our own vital interests, we'll lead not unilaterally if we must need to. On the other hand, on many issues, humanitarian issues, we need to invoke a multilateral response. And I think the need for United States leadership is one of the fundamental tenets of the Clinton administration. A second thing of importance, and something that's perhaps quite subtle but extremely important, and that is the interrelationship between domestic and foreign issues. As the president has said, we cannot be strong at home if we're not strong abroad, and we cannot be strong abroad if we're not strong at home. So trying to fit those together has been an important element of the Clinton foreign policy. That's why I've been talking about having an American desk here at the State Department, helping American business, trying to end the boycott of American companies, trying to work on trade treaties that are helpful to us. I think those will be the stamps of the Clinton foreign policy.
Leadership is not exactly an original ingredient in American foreign policy, is it? I mean, you're not saying that as a departure from previous
no, but
administrations.
I think that There has been some concern about whether or not America would be willing to continue to lead. I think there had been some indication that maybe America in this new period would not feel a responsibility for leadership. And certainly President Clinton feels that responsibility very strongly, but also he wants to make sure that he's got the domestic underpinnings so that we can carry out our international responsibilities.
The New York Times said in a column today, your approach so far has been largely to manage what you inherited and to put a Clinton-esque stamp on foreign policy in words, but not yet in behavior. Is that a fair characterization, do you think?
Well, you know, one never likes to doubt something that's said in a newspaper or a column, but I do doubt that. I don't think that's correct. Now, take the issue of population. The United States has changed its position on population. We're now supporting world population programs. We've changed our position on the environment, setting goals for climate control around the world. We certainly have taken a stronger stance on proliferation. So we've got some distance to go. We're only 1/12 of the way through our administration, but I don't think it's fair to say that it's been pure rhetoric because of the positions we've taken worldwide.
You rushed last week to correct statements by your number 3 here,
Yeah.
Peter Tarnoff, that the tradition of the U.S. taking the lead in international affairs, in his words, is going to be the case much less than it was before. And he added, it's different by design. Are you saying it is not different in the case of America taking the lead?
Yes, let me talk to you a little bit about that, Robin. To the extent that he was interpreted as indicating that the United States would play a less leading role than in the past, I simply disagree with that. The President disagrees with that. We'll be playing a leading role to protect our vital interests, to protect our strategic interests. And second, to the extent that he indicated that we did not have the resources to carry out those vital interests, to protect our vital interests, I simply think that's wrong. I think we will find the resources to play our leadership role in the world. We are the only superpower in the world. We have responsibility to act multilaterally where that's appropriate and to lead multilaterally where that's appropriate. We also will protect our vital interests if we have to unilaterally.
Well, let me put to you what the New York Times response was on Mr. Tarnoff's argument. He said Tarnoff's argument is less foolish than the charade that it provoked. He insisted the administration's decision to defer to European preferences over Bosnia was not the amateur stumble that many perceived it as, but a considered choice based on a new approach to the post-Cold War world. Now, there are a lot of pejorative things in there, but in other words, the New York Times interpretation of what he was saying is that, for instance, the performance on Bosnia was all deliberate and a new approach to working with the Allies because of the new situation in the post-Cold War world.
Well, certainly
Are you saying there is no new situation or new approach?
Well, if there's a new approach, it is a stronger leadership role. Sometimes, though, we will lead in a multilateral way, and that's what we've done on Bosnia. But I think we've had to be sensitive to the views of our allies in that situation. It is a problem in the center of Europe. It's a problem that the Europeans have been engaged in for centuries. That is the problem of the Balkans. So I think it's quite appropriate for us to approach that in a multilateral way. Let me talk to you a little bit about America's interests there again. I think we have an interest in the humanitarian aspects of that problem, but that, I think, is very appropriate to be carried out in a multilateral way. We have an interest in avoiding a spreading, or we have an interest in containing or confining that conflict. That, I think, is a role that the United States will carry out one way or the other by putting additional monitors in Kosovo, perhaps by having a military presence of some kind in Macedonia. I think that's what the interests of the United States are. Now, that certainly has been by design, but I don't call that a pulling back from our interests. Over and over again, I think you're going to see around the world the United States pursuing a leadership role, pursuing its vital interest. And as I say, to the extent that his comments were interpreted as the United States being limited or the United States being unable to expend the resources to protect our vital interests, I disagree with that.
We had a couple of former secretaries of state on the program week before last talking about Bosnia. And Henry Kissinger said, I think the last few weeks weakened American claims to leadership. It's not becoming to ask a Secretary of State to travel around the world and ask people to tell us what to do, which is how he characterized what you did on your European trip. What is your response to that, and what really happened on that trip?
Well, what I did on that trip was to go to Europe and talk about what our preference was, what we thought the best solution was. And we felt that the best thing to do was to lift the arms embargo, to give the Bosnian government a chance to defend itself. That arms embargo has worked to the disadvantage of the Bosnian government, perhaps unintentionally, but it has frozen in a vast disparity in favor of the Serbs. And so we thought the first step was to lift that arms embargo so the Bosnian Muslims could defend themselves. That's a policy that we still think is the best policy to pursue. But we can't do that without the consent of the other members of the United Nations. After all, the arms embargo was imposed by a vote of the Security Council that the United States participated in, the prior administration. It can be lifted only by action of the Security Council. We also thought that if the arms embargo was lifted, it'd be necessary, or it might be necessary, to have what we called compensatory airstrikes to prevent the Serbs from overrunning the Bosnians while the Bosnians were being armed. That's still our preferred option. We think that's the best way to go. But since that option couldn't be carried out without the support of our allies, those members of the Security Council, then we have turned to other matters. And we did this, I think, in a way, in a leadership approach by talking to them, trying to find common ground, bringing them here to Washington and working out the joint action plan that was adopted a week ago last Saturday. It may be that others would have preferred the United States to go to the Allies and say, you must do this, we insist on your doing this, or we'll rupture the alliance. The President decided not to do that. He has felt from the beginning, he had two basic principles from the beginning about Bosnia. First, it's not in the United States' interest to have ground troops there except as peacekeepers. And second, the problem would be approached multilaterally. And the President has consistently held to those two main themes.
Mm-hmm. I guess the former secretaries are suggesting, it sounds to me as though they're suggesting, that this is uncharacteristic of the American posture in the past, and certainly during the Cold War, that it expressed its point of view and whipped the Allies into the fold, rounded them up into the fold. Is that the way it used to be? I mean, did the United States insist on getting its way, characteristically or typically in the past?
Yes, I think in a bipolar world where every decision was posited on how it would affect the United States or how it would affect Russia in that confrontation, then when you went to your allies and said, we want to do this, it had a different kind of imperative than it does in the present situation. Bosnia is a human tragedy, a humanitarian, just a grotesque humanitarian situation. But it is not a confrontation between the United States and Russia. It does not affect our vital national interests, except as we're concerned about humanitarian matters and except as we're trying to contain it. So I can understand how prior secretaries who were perhaps accustomed to getting their way with the Allies simply by saying so are surprised by the current situation. But as we go forward, Robin, as we look down the road in the future, there will be situations where we need to approach it multilaterally. And in those situations, you have to deal with your allies. But those I do not think will be the majority of situations. The majority of situations will be where the United States defines its vital interests and goes about accomplishing.
So in the second big action that really defines the post-Cold War world, if Somalia was the first, perhaps the Gulf War was the first, if Somalia was the second, this one which is defining it now, there really is a new situation. The U.S. leverage is less, is that, with the vis-a-vis the Allies?
Yes, I think the U.S. leverage is less because we've defined it as a place where we want to handle the matter multilaterally. Bosnia is a much different case than Somalia. Somalia is a rather simple military case. Bosnia is a very tough military case because of the ancient hatred, because of the geography of the country. It's a very mountainous place. It's a place where air power has relatively little effect. Now, one of the things I think perhaps the American people have not understood adequately is that there's no simple air power solution. All of our military planners say that an airstrike could perhaps accomplish something the first or the second day, but thereafter, the artillery pieces, the mortars would be hidden in the hills, hidden under trees, or even more frighteningly placed next to schools or mosques or hospitals. So I think there are real limitations on air power as a solution to the problem in Bosnia. So if you rule out ground troops, if you find air power ineffective, and if you define it as a humanitarian situation, then your options are really much different than they would be in a place like Somalia, where militarily it was rather simple to solve that problem.
Do you feel in your own conscience that the United States has fulfilled whatever moral obligation Bosnia presented to us?
My job is to worry about American interests, and I think we're pursuing American interests adequately here. Obviously, we're all appealed to by humanitarian matters, and we ought to do as much as we can around the world. And we are doing that. If you recall, in Bosnia, we initiated the airdrop program. We've now dropped over 2.5 million meals into Bosnia. We worked out the no-flight zone. We've been the leader in trying to get the War Claims Tribunal, and it was approved last week by the United Nations. So it isn't as if we'd ignored this problem. We're doing what we can in the context of Bosnia, which is, as I've said before, such a problem from hell.
You said at the University of Minnesota last week, we must be more engaged internationally, not less, more ardent in the promotion of democracy, not less. What does more ardent mean? It doesn't have a Kennedy-esque pay any price, bear any burden ring to it, or intention, does it? Or what does it?
Well, I think it'll be one of the fundamental tenets of President Clinton's administration that we'll go out of our way to promote democracy around the world. Fundamentally, that's what we're doing in Russia. Now, you haven't mentioned Russia, but Russia has been one of the big success stories for President Kennedy. He came into office, he found a severely threatened President Yeltsin, and he decided that he would support President Yeltsin as the best exponent of democracy in Russia, and he took big risks to do that, going to Vancouver and committing the U.S. Not only its prestige, but its treasury to be helpful to the Russians. Following up at Tokyo, once again, leading the world coalition to support democracy in Russia. Now, we're going to be doing that in instances great and small around the world. Take the matter of Cambodia. When we came into office, people were saying the election can never happen. The Khmer Rouge will end the election. People were saying, should the election be called off? And together with our colleagues in the United Nations, we were steadfast, and that election has been one of the triumphs of democracy. Take a situation in South America. I'm going to be going to the OAS this week, and we're going to be taking strong action, I believe, to promote democracy in Guatemala. I made a speech last week on Africa and the promotion of democracy. For example, a multiracial democracy in South Africa. That's within reach. So it's that kind of thing that I meant when we must be ardent in our promotion of democracy and human rights all around the world.
What are you going to do in this hemisphere about Haiti, whose power structure is just at the moment snubbing the efforts to have President Aristide return there? What kind of pressure are you going to put on them?
Well, let me just back up on that for a minute. Robin, when we came into office, the outgoing administration was regarding that largely as an immigration problem. We set our sights on the restoration of democracy and the return of President Aristide, and we've been working to that end, and I think we're making real progress to that end. It's a difficult situation because it's necessary to persuade the present government there, the illegal government, persuade the military and the police to accept the restoration of democracy and to accept the return of Aristide. What we're going to do is we're going to let them know there will be severe sanctions, limitations on their ability to travel, limitations on their financial situation if they do not go along with this program, which is a very reasonable program for returning to that country the elected president. we're going to be using a good deal of influence, a good deal of muscle, if you will, to try to put together this program for the restoration of democracy there, and to do it within this year.
To go back to your statement that you're on the verge of defining a Clinton foreign policy more explicitly than has been possible because you've been preoccupied with the ongoing situations, are there going to be events or occasions coming up where that's going to be defined?
Yes, I think there are ongoing events almost on a weekly basis. There will be a meeting of the European Community of Foreign Ministers next week, and then a NATO meeting. The President will go to the G7 meeting in Tokyo, the meeting of the industrialized democracies in Tokyo in the early part of July. I'll be going to the ASEAN meeting. One of the things we have not talked about enough, and perhaps we don't talk about enough in America, is Asia. We need to pay great attention to the situation in Asia. It has a number of ramifications for us, each of them important. From the standpoint of trade, our principal trade deficit is with two countries in Asia, Japan and China. That deserves a lot of attention. We have the problems in Korea, need to deal with North Korea, so I think it's very desirable that both the President and I will be in Asia twice in July, putting a focus on Asian problems. I think we're somewhat too much European-centered sometimes.
But what will happen that Americans will know that there is what they can recognize as a Clinton foreign policy?
Well, I'm sure the President will be speaking out, and I'll be speaking out, trying to give some broader context to the things that we're doing. Of course, the President has been clear from the beginning that the promotion of democracy and human rights was a first principle. He's also been very clear that the interrelationship between our economy and our world position was a critical one. That's a very important insight, to make it clear that, as I said, you have to be strong abroad in order to be strong at home. Let me expand on that just for a moment. If we're not strong abroad, if we're preoccupied by crises that are unpredictable, then the President's going to be thrown off track of dealing with domestic problems. But if we can be both strong abroad and strong at home, then we can chart our own course. And I hope that and think that the President's economic program is going to have a burst of new enthusiasm, a new energy for the United States, and that make it more possible for to define our situation internationally. As I say, we're only 1/12 of the way into the administration.
Well, Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Robin.
Still to come on the NewsHour, seeking asylum and the business of art museums. Next tonight, we focus on the debate over the United States policy on immigration and political asylum. In the aftermath of the bombing of the World Trade Center in New York, many in Congress are saying the laws allowing illegal aliens to claim political asylum need to be revised. Correspondent Tom Bearden looks at the problem.
New York's Kennedy Airport on a recent afternoon. It's one of the major ports of entry into the United States. If this day is typical, 13,000 people will arrive here from foreign lands. Some belong here. Some have permission to visit. And a few are trying to enter the U.S. through loopholes in the system. This young man tried to get in from Venezuela. Immigration inspectors say they caught him with a phony passport. He's now being escorted to the next flight back. The irony is that if he had just known the right words to say, he could have stayed.
He had a Venezuelan passport with what we refer to as a double laminate. The photo page has a lamination over the entire page. He had cut the original photo out, replaced it with his, and laminated it a second time, and you saw him going home.
If he had claimed asylum, would he still be here?
If he had claimed asylum, he would have had a right to present that claim before the immigration court. Venue lies with the court, and yes, he'd still be here.
So the key to beating this system is what you say when you get off the airplane.
Well, if an alien wants to take advantage of the provisions of the immigration law, one way to do it is to claim asylum.
The blast at the World Trade Center threw a bright spotlight on this country's asylum policy. In particular, it raised questions about Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, an inspirational figure for several of the suspects in the bombing. Rahman extended his stay in this country by asking for asylum. That's increasingly easy to do these days. About 100,000 people showed up on these shores last year and asked for asylum from political persecution. No one knows how many of those claims were authentic.
What we're really experiencing is a problem with illegal aliens. And within that larger group, the majority of them take advantage of the liberal asylum provisions of the law. Of the 15,000 inadmissibles apprehended last fiscal year, better than 9,000 made claims for asylum subsequent to apprehension.
It wasn't always this controversial. 2 decades ago, most refugees fled across the nearest border to a neighboring country and never came near the U.S. Asylum was something granted to people who asked for it after they had entered this country. It was reserved for rare instances like East Bloc citizens who wanted to defect. The great refugee crises of the 1970s changed that. With the help of cheap air travel, people were fleeing persecution farther and faster than ever before. A lot of them wanted to come here. The huddled masses became so massive that the old system was overwhelmed. In 1980, a new refugee law designed to restore order was passed. It set up specific quotas to determine the number of people who could visit a U.S. embassy abroad and ask to enter as refugees. There were no quotas established for people asking for asylum after they arrived here. The eventual result is the current situation at JFK Airport. Today, pretty much anyone can show up at the airport without any travel documents at all and ask for asylum. These 2 young men arrived on a flight from Madrid without passports, apparently from China originally. No one's sure.
They mentioned asylum, yes, based upon the one-child rule in China, forced sterilization, that they're going to be scheduled for an appointment before an immigration judge. The judge has jurisdiction over the application for asylum. The only thing to be determined is whether they'll be detained until they see the judge or not. The short time that you and the camera crew were here, I think you've witnessed 10 to 12 apprehensions at just one part of Kennedy Airport. What you witnessed today is being repeated at 5 or 6 other terminals.
Eventually, these young men will have a chance to tell an immigration officer or a judge why they're afraid of persecution back home. If the judge thinks they have a credible case, they'll get asylum. But the caseload is so heavy that the judge won't see them for months. What happens in the meantime? They could be sent here, a private detention facility run for the INS under contract. But they probably won't. The INS says asylum seekers are many and beds are few. Most people who are held here are like this man, Luis from Peru. He asked us to keep his last name confidential. Luis arrived last fall, fleeing what he said was a death threat by Peruvian Shining Path guerrillas.
Terrorists were threatening to destroy what we had just recently began to obtain in our town, which was peace and development. I was sentenced to death by the Shining Path in Peru, as were other social and political people who were involved in the struggle for peace and justice in Peru.
What happened when you arrived in New York?
I was very afraid. I was frightened.
You used a false passport, correct?
Yes, because of these circumstances, I had to leave with another identity, which was not my own.
Luis's lawyer says he didn't understand the technical ins and outs of the system. No one had told him you have to ask in order to be considered for asylum.
If you're trying to sneak into the United States and using asylum as a pretext, you're well advised to mention asylum as soon as you get off the plane. But unfortunately, most bona fide asylum seekers don't know that. And most people that are suffering repression in the world today are pretty simple, uneducated people.
If he had claimed asylum at the airport, would he be in detention today?
Probably not.
Luis eventually applied for asylum with his lawyer's help, but remained in detention while his case was being heard. His request was denied, and it's now on appeal. He's still behind bars waiting for the appeal to run its course. As long as he takes up space in detention, it's space that can't be used for someone else. Those who know enough to ask for asylum at the airport usually aren't sent to detention. They're released within hours, like these Tamils from Sri Lanka.
If you're still in the United States on September the 1st, go for your hearing.
Some show up for the hearing. Others don't. The suspicion is they want to get in for economic reasons, but only political persecution qualifies people for asylum.
Absolutely very few have legitimate asylum claims. And I say that because they never pursued their claim. Better than 50% never showed for an initial hearing before the judge.
The problem really became acute in the last year when the present system for hearing claims became fully workable and word began to drift back to foreign countries on how to beat the system. All of this has led to calls for change.
The asylum system is sick.
But what kind of change? Almost everyone at this recent House hearing agreed that illegal immigrants are taking advantage of the present system.
We've all heard the stories of entrepreneurs in foreign countries who say, I'll get you into America, just come on the plane, I'll show you how to rip up your documents, give me $20,000. And it happens. That means something.
Several members were offering proposals for change. One would pre-inspect travel documents at foreign airports. Another speeds up and streamlines the hearing procedure. A third immediately excludes anyone who arrives with improper documents, but also contains protections for legitimate asylum seekers. Top people in the INS back some of the changes.
There is a broad consensus that legislation is needed to modify existing procedures.
But immigration lawyers worry that real victims of persecution might be hurt by the changes.
I see people who come in with fraudulent documents, with bona fide claims. I see women who were raped by government forces in El Salvador and persecuted beyond imagination, that come in, crossing through, obviously, other countries, and then entering the country with either no documents or fraudulent documents. Those are the kind of people that would be summarily excluded under the proposed legislation we're hearing today. That troubles me greatly.
Are you saying that there's not a problem here at all and that the legislation that is pending before us should be just discarded? There's not a problem out there? We're misunderstanding the whole scheme of things, that things are not as bad as what are being alleged here, and we should do nothing?
We have a system that's in an embryonic stage. It's just up and running now. I think that the quality of their adjudications is vastly superior to anything that we've seen in the last 12 or 13 years. So I think that it is manageable with sufficient resources, which is to say that currently the resources are not there, the delays are present, and it allows those people, and I would say that they are a minority, certainly nowhere near a majority, but they're certainly out there who seek to abuse the asylum system. The delays work in their favor, and we can deal with those delays.
Some lawyers think there's less of a problem than appears. They say District Director Slattery deliberately created a false sense of crisis by releasing people he knew had a good chance of disappearing.
Really, there is detention space, and we have plenty of examples of people who don't belong in detention and are taking needed space, but we have sort of a first-come, first-detained policy, I guess you would call it, in New York. And I think that there really has been an effort to undermine the credibility of asylum, basically, and of the need for people seeking asylum to come in without documentation or with fraudulent documentation in many cases.
Well, let me ask you to respond to that criticism. They say that you could more effectively use your resources if you were more willing to let people out of detention.
Well, the opposite is quite true. I told you that in the summer of 1991, I looked at our work measurement reports. For the first 8 months of that fiscal year, although we had encountered 4,000 inadmissible aliens, we had only removed 87 from the United States. At that time, we were following the practice that these attorneys are suggesting we return to, and that is we release aliens from detention. Now, we've changed our detention policy, and the end result is a 500% increase in removals. So I would say to you that the current detention policy is the most effective. The attorneys don't like it because their clients go home.
Attorneys may object, but most influential policymakers feel it's time for a change. The question is what kind of change and how much any change will accomplish. Even the lawmakers recognize that immigration policy is driven by conflicting goals.
The word is out around the world that it's very easy to fool people with not even the slightest colorable claim for asylum. Can fool the authorities, get here, and stay here. On the other hand, we also know that there's that Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor. My middle name is Ellis.
Some say those conflicts mean no immigration policy can ever be flawless.
On the one hand, we want to help people in trouble, and on the other hand, we're afraid of losing what we've got here and of giving away the store. And I think those two conflicting interests have to be balanced, and there will always be a tension in our immigration laws between those two interests. And there's no way that tension's going to go away. We just have to find a way to balance it.
Back at Kennedy Airport, things went as expected. The two young men from Madrid were released a couple of hours after they'd been picked up and disappeared into the spring afternoon. Destination unknown. No one in the government knew where they were going, whether they'd show up for their hearing, or even their real names. That same afternoon, Luis, still awaiting appeal of his case, completed his 153rd day in detention.
Finally tonight, a look at the business side of the art museum world. Shrinking budgets, rising costs, and anemic endowments are hitting American art museums hard. Many museums are dealing with their financial problems by resorting to controversial business deals, deals that some critics fear are turning the museums into a branch of the entertainment industry. Our report is by Time Magazine's senior editor, George Russell.
A trip to an art museum these days can be as much a lesson in mass marketing as an aesthetic experience. Increasingly, commercialization is sharing the place with connoisseurship.
That's $6.
Some critics point to New York's Guggenheim Museum as the most radical example yet of how museums adopt business techniques to finance an ambitious and controversial agenda for growth. The Guggenheim's flagship Frank Lloyd Wright building is open again after a 2-year renovation and expansion at a cost of $54 million. Last summer, the Guggenheim expanded into Manhattan's trendy Soho district, opening a new $6 million branch. Here, the entrance door opens directly into a store. For these museum goers, the galleries are unavoidably the second stop. Perhaps the most controversial plan involves sending large numbers of works from the museum's permanent collection to sites around the world. In effect, putting them out on long-term lease. The guiding force behind the Guggenheim's expansion is its controversial director, Thomas Krenz, the former director of the Williams College Museum of Art and a graduate of the Yale School of Management. He argues that currently, the vast majority of the permanent collection sits in storage.
The point here is that the concentration of the collection is so extraordinary in terms of its depth that we're not really exiling a number of works that can't be seen. We are making them accessible.
Work will soon begin on a huge $125 million satellite museum of the Guggenheim in Bilbao, Spain. The city will pay for the construction of the museum, for its operation, and in addition will pay the Guggenheim a $20 million upfront fee.
It is a museum with its own conception to which our collection substantially contributes and guarantees its success, but will have a clear and distinct identity. And it will be the Guggenheim Museum. The fact of that it happens to be in Bilbao versus a museum in New York or possibly a museum in Venice, I don't think are as relevant now as they would have been 50 years ago. In fact, they may even, in a future-oriented world, they may even become, the differences may be irrelevant to the overall experience.
Plans have also been drawn up to build yet another postmodern Guggenheim into the side of a mountain in Salzburg, Austria. Bob Hughes is Time Magazine's art critic. He and others believe the Guggenheim is turning itself into an international franchise.
You franchise a collection by curating shows and then charging a very high price to other museums for having the show. This is what the Guggenheim has done. You franchise it mainly, however, by transforming what I think Solomon Guggenheim originally intended to be a permanent collection in New York for the edifications of the citizens of that town into something like an impermanent collection which can equally well, pop up in Venice or Salzburg or wherever it might be. In other words, you turn the museum into a kind of parody of a multinational company.
Museums used to represent permanence, used to represent a repository of art treasures that a consensus over time has determined are the great works of art.
Critic Hilton Kramer is editor of the New Criterion, a monthly journal of the arts.
The idea of sending out significant portions of your collection on long-term loans to other sites and even other countries destroys the basic integrity of what the museum is, which is a collection.
Thomas Krenz, however, sees traditional notions about museums and their mission as outdated. His vision of a museum is that of an evolving, dynamic, and inviting place, or group of places, that draws crowds, that offers excitement, and that makes money.
It is inconsistent to say that cultural institutions must rely on their support from the private sector and expect them to be anything other than entrepreneurial. How would you recommend it be done? Because the point is that art museums cannot afford to do that. So what are the alternatives for us? Forget all of these things. Don't worry about special exhibitions. You want to know the best way to build a museum and preserve the work? Create a black box, don't let anybody in, and you'll be able to preserve the works for 10,000 years. But is that the purpose of culture? Is that the purpose of art museums?
The Guggenheim isn't the only museum that has turned its collection into a floating asset. The Boston Museum of Fine Arts is discussing a 20-year arrangement with the Japanese Museum to show works from its permanent collection for as long as 5 years at a time. And the newly expanded San Jose Museum of Art will fill its new space with works from the Whitney Museum's permanent collection in New York. It's part of a recent $4.4 million deal. Museum directors like to underline the importance of sustaining an international audience. But the bottom line is, these are business deals.
Well, I think museums have become increasingly tied to a kind of market mentality.
Jed Pearl is an art critic for Vogue magazine.
They're very tied to the whole question of how to make money, how to expand their audiences, how to enlarge. That was the whole thrust in the 1980s. A museum that wasn't building an edition, a museum that wasn't pulling in more people, having bigger shows, was a museum that people felt was failing.
$73 million, $74 million, $75 million.
Beginning in the 80s, wheeling and dealing in the art market reached new heights.
Fair warning at $75 million. For you, sir, $75 million.
Prices for art skyrocketed, and so did popular interest. It was a boom, and expansion was the byword. It was also the beginning of a new effort to make museums more relevant, more fashionable, to target a bigger market.
So money is being sucked out from the sort of essential, central tasks of the museum and is all going to the front stuff, the upfront stuff. Bigger gift shops, bigger signs, bigger banners for these big shows, which you need to keep pulling in more people to keep justifying all this huge capital expenditure in the 80s.
Same day, this line. Ticket holders, people with tickets, ticket holders, entrance straight ahead.
The Henri Matisse blockbuster exhibit, New York's Museum of Modern Art, attracted 6,000 people a day.
Tickets, please.
Still, launching an exhibit of this scale forced the museum to charge $5 over its regular admission price, just to break even. Museum of Modern Art director Richard Oldenburg recognizes that such shows have a downside.
Even when we put on a great exhibition like this, we're very proud of it, and it's a great service to art scholarship as well as to the public. It still encourages that belief that you go to museums only for major events. And what all of us recognize is that for the long run, what museums, art museums, have to do is to build and retain the audience that recognizes that museums exist to care for great collections, and those collections merit revisiting and study and enjoyment.
The museum effort to target a broader audience takes many forms. For example, the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York pioneered the trend of opening a series of corporate-sponsored exhibition boutiques. This is the Philip Morris branch, located in the lobby of the company's Midtown headquarters. Branch Director Thelma Golden.
We have a gallery, which is about 1,200 square feet, where we have exhibitions which change every 8 to 10 weeks. The sculpture court, which is a public space where people can come and eat their lunch and sit and wait for trains or buses.
On this day, a group of homeless kids were brought in to see an exhibit. Hope Sandro is founder of the Whitney-sponsored Artist and Homeless Collaborative Program.
It makes art part of every person's life versus having art put in behind barriers and in a certain institution. It makes art and life merge more.
Another approach, embraced by the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, includes extending hours on Friday and Saturday evenings. In an effort to strengthen the attraction, refreshments and music are offered, making the venerable Met a kind of yuppie social center.
It's different from gathering in a bar or sitting outside in a cafe.
It makes the museum a more friendly place. It's, to add music, it just makes everybody more relaxed, I think.
The long-term effect is going to be that the museum is going to be trivialized, and future generations will get used to the idea that it's just another kind of cultural entertainment, like going to the movies.
The Met estimates that 10 to 12,000 people come every weekend during extended evening hours. Philippe de Montebello is director of the Met.
What we are doing is gradually increasing the numbers of people who are learning the whole art of visual literacy, of how to visit a museum, how to enjoy works of art, and are coming more and more frequently. We find that more of our visitors are frequent visitors, and that, of course, means that we're achieving the mission for which we were founded.
David Ross, director of the Whitney Museum, agrees.
The issue is museums are not exclusive clubs. Museums are social instruments, public spaces, sites for an open-ranging discourse about art and its meaning, and hopefully places where the pleasure of art can be shared by as broad a set of populations, audiences, as possible. And if we set our eyes on that, and that's our goal, is to try to serve as broad a range of populations and audiences as we can, without losing track of who we are, what our mission is, what our sets of standards are, and how they evolve in relationship to time, then we can evolve new museum forms for the 21st century.
Clearly, museums are evolving under severe financial pressure, and evolution isn't necessarily bad. But as art museums come up with new business schemes and try to seduce the public with novelty, more and more art treasures will be leaving their traditional homes for the West Coast, Japan, or Spain. And the debate about the propriety of that evolution will grow.
Again, the major stories of this Tuesday. President Clinton indicated today he would accept less taxes and deeper spending cuts in order to get his economic plan through the Senate. And in Bosnia, at least 15 people were killed and dozens injured when Serb mortar shells struck spectators during a soccer game in Sarajevo. It was one of the worst attacks on civilians in Sarajevo since the war began. Good night, Robin.
Good night, Roger. That's the News Hour for tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow night. I'm Robert MacNeil. Good night.
Part of helping the world live and communicate better is keeping it well informed. That's why funding for the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour is provided by AT&T and by PepsiCo. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
Here's an OPB program alert. Contrary to published information in area newspapers and magazines, Clint Eastwood, not Ross Perot, is the guest on Talking with David Frost, tonight at 10.
I'm Nancy Marshall with OPB Radio.
Tomorrow morning from 5 to 9 on OPB Radio, it's Morning Edition. Tomorrow, using storytelling techniques to teach American history to school children. That's tomorrow morning on OPB Radio.